Yes. A very good evening to all our history enthusiasts. Welcome again to another lecture on the occasion of International Labour Day. Uh, our topic for today is political and economic challenges facing the working class, and we have with us Comrade Satyanand M, Secretary All India Trade Union Congress Karnataka, as our resource person for today's lecture. Uh, Even though we have come a long way since the independence, the problems that our working class is facing have not reduced substantially. In fact, there are more complicated problems and more complex problems than before. And as such, it is very important to discuss these. And therefore, today's lecture is very relevant and very necessary. Uh, Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our today's resource person, uh, Comrade Satyanand. Completed his BTech Mechanical Engineering NIT Jalandhar from NIT Jalandhar, and he also has a Master's in Arts from on the in Globalization and Labor from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. He has a 10-year working experience as software engineer in Tata Consultancy Services and 10 years and continuing at All India Trade Union Congress. He works with industrial workers across different industries in automobile, pharmaceutical, construction, engineering, and chemical industries. Therefore, Sir has a working knowledge, a practical knowledge of the problems that are being faced by the working classes of our country. He is very experienced in this particular subject, and therefore the perfect resource person for today's lecture. Once again, sir, on behalf of myself, Nidhi, and my entire team of the history enthusiasts, I welcome you to this session. I also welcome to the stream my friend and co-host Ms. Nidhi Katti, who will join us shortly. She's the vice president of the history enthusiast. We also have Mrs. Chaya Momaya today with us, treasurer of the history enthusiast, and my very dear and close friend, Ms. Shivlila Nandgavi. I welcome you all and also all the audience who is watching us. You can leave your questions in the comment section. If any of you would like to join the stream directly and participate in the interaction, please text or email us and I will send you the link for joining. Thank you so much. We also have another comrade Krishne Gowda Lingaya sir. He's joined us this in the stream. Welcome you all. I now request Sir to begin today's lecture.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I wish to congratulate the History Enthusiast Club for organizing a relevant event on the occasion of May Day. And I will begin my presentation with May Day greetings to all the participants in this online interaction. And before I begin with the presentation, I would like to just suggest that in case there are questions or comments or opinions that people need to share, so they can please feel free to do so in the middle of my presentation and interrupt me if they seem fit. So with this, I will begin the presentation on the subject of political and economic challenges before the working class today. So it's a very broad topic that uh, uh, I have chosen, and I will try to do justice to it by also looking at some global as well as national as well as state level issues that we are facing. And it is my submission that essentially what we see at the global stage is not essentially very different from what we see at the district or even the state level in terms of working class issues. So, my first proposition that I would like to begin with is I think we have to start by identifying the biggest economic threat to the working class politics, as we call it. So, the idea of neoliberalism, which was propagated it started as a philosophy, neoliberalism as an economic philosophy in the 1940s by people like Frederick von Hayek and people who currently also gather every year under the umbrella of the World Economic Forum at Davos. So it was a clique of such economists and philosophers like Karl Popper, von Hayek on one side, and a philosopher like Karl Popper on the other hand, whose major aim was to undermine the idea of socialism and communist values, as attack it in both as a philosophy and an economic mode of organization of society. So it began with humble beginnings in 1940s, but in the 1970s across the globe, when major economies were facing what we call today as stagflation, phenomenon which basically had stagnation in terms of economic growth. The GDP growth was stagnating, and it was combined with very curiously high rates of inflation. Because traditional economics, what we see usually is that high growth rates are usually accompanied with high inflation rates. But this was a very different and a very curious phenomena, which was in the 1970s saw major economies in the West, including America and Western Europe, struggling through what was a period termed as stagflation. So until then, the dominant economic philosophy, which was running large over Europe and the social democracies of Europe, to be precise, was what we would associate with Milton Keynes. So, a Keynesian economic idea was that if there is a problem of unemployment, if there is a problem of depressed demand in the economy, the idea is to pump in money to the economy and pump in money to the people at the bottom of the chain, so that they are the ones who are more likely to spend what they earn as wages. And then you have a renewed cycle of demand which will kick in, and henceforth, a virtuous cycle of supply and demand is created to give balance to the economy. So, one thing we have to understand, even Keynesian economics doesn't challenge the roots of capitalism. But what Keynesian economics and this idea of what is also called demand side economics, which was largely responsible for the rise of social democracies in Western Europe, especially the Nordic and the Scandinavian countries, emerged post World War II as a sort of a response to various communist governments and socialist governments being formed across Europe and Eastern Europe and in parts of Asia. So this was the beginning of the Cold War, and during that time, even capitalism had to understand that there were excesses committed by capitalism, and to provide a sort of comfort to the working class, social democracy was propagated as being a fine balance between capitalism and also maintaining the needs of uh, the people at the bottom of our society in terms of economic status. So, this philosophy of Keynesian economics, which resulted in the rise of social democracies in Europe, was unable to solve this problem of stagflation that we experienced in 1970s. So therefore, under Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan of UK and USA, neoliberalism first gained prominence as a philosophy, economic philosophy that actually guided state policy. So legitimacy was provided to this hodgepodge of economics and philosophy for the very first time. So essentially, neoliberalism as an economic thought uh, entails one or two very important things. One is very little or no state control at all on the functioning of the market. This is the essential proposition that neoliberalism places before us. So essentially, the markets must continue unfettered, free, even if it results in monopoly capitalism or whatever. But the idea is that the market should be allowed to function freely without any state intervention. And even what were considered as holy cows in under social democracy, for instance, like a minimum wage, the concept of a minimum wage under which wages cannot be allowed to fall any further was no longer considered a holy cow in neoliberalism. So full employment was guaranteed when both wages are fully flexible. If wages are fully flexible, then full employment is guaranteed. Essentially, what people like Milton Keynes were trying to say in the 1980s is that don't bargain for wages. So if you don't bargain for wages, the market will provide full employment. It really doesn't matter whether the wages are enough to fulfill the basic necessities, the subsistence of a worker's family. But as long as you allow wages to go well below minimum wages and allow wages to be fully flexible, then the market is capable of providing full employment. These were the basic tenets of neoliberalism that were propagated as being state policy across UK and US very prominently in the 1980s. And this also gave rise to what we call the Thatcher era, where unions and the working class movements were smashed up by very ruthlessly by Margaret Thatcher. The coal mine worker strike, the steel worker strike, the public transport worker strike in the UK were successfully thwarted, and those strikes were crushed mercilessly by the state at the behest of private corporations. And similar things also happened in the USA. So as as we go a little ahead in time, uh, to say the 1987-88, when there was another crisis, economic crisis brewing in countries of Latin America. So there was a conference organized in Washington of all the finance ministers of these struggling Latin American economies, alongside economists from the World Bank and the IMF. So curiously, a rare consensus emerged during that particular conference in 1987, and what is today termed as the Washington Consensus. So the Washington Consensus on economic policy, which emerged in 1987, has been the guiding philosophy of neoliberal policies across developed and developing economies till date. So what it entails is basically giving unfettered access to market, minimal state control, labor law reforms, then allowing a high degree of mobility of capital between states, between countries. So these were the aspects that the 10-point Washington Consensus came out with. And this consensus was implemented in countries originally like Argentina was one of the first such country which was forced to implement the reforms under the banner of Washington Consensus. Interestingly, India also faced a very similar situation in 1991-92 when we were faced with a balance of payment crisis in 91, where our foreign reserves were not enough to cover the import bill for more than 1.5 months. And India, under such a situation of crisis, was forced to accept the very same Washington crisis in a slightly modified, probably a slightly diluted form. It was not as ruthless or brutal as it was in Latin America. So this is the basic. This is the global economic challenge that working class across the globe faces, and the challenge still remains thus. And the danger, if not anything, has increased over the later period of neoliberalism. So, this being the first proposition, so what also happened across the globe, across economies of scale, is factories became unviable. Manufacturing sector became unviable in the era of globalization. Manufacturing sectors, factories basically became unviable, economically unviable in the Western economies. And then since globalization as a process had already gained prominence even under the even before say India becoming part of the globalized economy, China had already made significant taken significant steps to become a market economy, integrating themselves with the world economy much earlier than India. So what also resulted as what resulted as the process of globalization across the world was that we saw a broad division, which we also call as the global division of labor. So this global division of labor basically envisages that all manufacturing activities will move to a place where labor is available for cheaper rates, labor is liable to be more controlled, labor is disciplined by the state itself, state acting on the behest of large corporations. The state will ensure that labor problems, industrial relation problems do not emerge, and the process of production continues uninterrupted. And perfect conditions for such a situation were provided for by the Chinese government. And therefore, we see that today China has emerged as the world's factory. So today it is estimated that close to 40% of all manufacturing activity by value happens in China, and that is a staggering figure. So today we also
Sir,
see, yeah,
uh, can I ask a question here?
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
please, please.
where there is cheap labor available,
Mhm.
uh, is it will that labor be also skilled uh, according to the requirements of the factories or the big companies? Is there no
Yeah,
problem of skill and education there?
skill and education, frankly, not too much. I just come to that question in a couple of minutes because that is what I was about to discuss right after this. So, in this global division of labor, it is important to understand that China becomes the world's factory and India becomes the world's back office. So, 1990s also saw the tremendous growth of Indian IT companies. Indian IT companies in the services sector grew by leaps and bounds, and the Y2K scare that happened across Western economies also helped the Indian software industry. India has emerged as probably the world's back office, and China has remained as the world's factory today. So that is broad global division of labor. Not that this is a hard and fast rule. There are internal contradictions as well, where the manufacturing uh, there is unhealthy competition between economies to compete for the investment, and this competition usually leads to what we call as race to the bottom scenario, where countries compete on the basis of reducing social security and subsidies to the working class. They'll say that we will cut down wages. Minimum wages here is lower than China. Wages here are far lesser. Why don't you move here? So on this basis, countries are now competing for huge investments. So this is what we call is a race to the bottom approach, which generally does not help the economy in the longer run. We'll come to that later. And to answer your question about skill being an important part of whether the necessary skills are available in these countries, or is it just a question of the wage differential? Just lower wages alone are enough, or is it also a matter of skill? Frankly, traditionally, most economies, how they have progressed is from being a largely agrarian society. The first stage in economic development of societies and countries is the workforce from the agriculture sector moves to the manufacturing sector. So, and then there is an intervening generation of two who works in the manufacturing sector, and finally later on they move to the far more remunerative sector, which is the services sector. So broadly, any economy is divided into three sectors. The primary sector, which is the agriculture sector, which is supposed to provide raw material to the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector takes the raw material from the primary sector, does value addition, does some finishing and packaging, and the commodity is thus produced for the needs of the society. And the process of reaching these commodities to the end consumer is taken up by the services sector in terms of distribution network, marketing network, sales network, then retail stores, then other peripheral activities like banking, IT systems, etc., are part of the services sector. This is the broad division within an economy. And the idea is that people from agriculture, because there is an option to move to manufacturing, and at every stage of this development, wages go up, productivity is far higher in manufacturing, productivity is far higher in services in comparison to agriculture. Generally, that is how trajectory of economies have worked globally. But very curiously, in India, we have a major problem. So, coming to the question of skill and the workforce and the composition of the workforce. So, whenever we talk about challenges before the workforce, we have to understand the composition of the workforce in India as well. So, the composition of the workforce in India is very distinct, and we have a very unique problem. And this problem is not only at the macro level, at the national level, but the same problem in differing uh, scale is present at every in every state also. So today, what has happened is we have close to 50% or more than 50% of our workforce who's engaged in agriculture and allied activities. So if our workforce is roughly around 60 crores, so of the 60 crore, 30 crore people in India are directly engaged in agriculture and allied activities. And the contribution of agriculture to the national GDP is only around 14%. So this is the problem that we have. This is probably the single largest problem that the state and public policy advocates have to grapple with. So essentially, we have 50% of our workforce engaged in activities that contribute to only 14% of the economy. So essentially, meaning your wages are low. That is why we are not able to provide uh, good quality employment or good quality or good wages within this sector of agriculture. And that is why we have this large scale migration from the agriculture sector to manufacturing sector, or sometimes to even services sectors. And that is also the root of problems when we look at things like the urban and rural divide that we see in India, and the forced distress migration that we are witness to every day in our cities, where hordes of people, thousands of people are forced to move away from agriculture to cities without having any stable employment also. So this is a problem that emanates essentially from this economic problem. So agriculture is in deep crisis in India. So because of this deep crisis, workers and people are moving out of villages, moving out of agriculture into the cities, trying to get jobs in manufacturing. And this is where the question of skill comes. Manufacturing in India is not developed to the extent to absorb this huge migrant workforce from the villages, from the agriculture sector. So today there is a crisis not only in agriculture, the crisis is also in manufacturing, because we are not able to generate employment. Lot of times our policymakers and our politicians understand the problem. They make the right promises, but they hardly ever try to implement these issues. So when 2014, when the BJP government promised 2 crore jobs per year, it was right on the nub, because it it is a response, it is a correct political response to a real material problem. But the fact remains that the reality of that promise is hardly ever questioned today. So the question still remains that whether we will ever be able to have an industry that is capable of taking care of the employment needs of our society, especially from the villages, especially from the agriculture sector. Till date, we have failed miserably. And to that extent, that is where schemes like the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act come handy, and they act as a very important buffer. That cannot be a long term solution. NREG's wages cannot substitute real employment. All that is understood. But the fact remains that the manufacturing sector in the village, in the cities, are unable to provide employment. So therefore, it is equally necessary for the state and for public policy to intervene to ensure that there is employment created at the villages, in order to at least help people struggling from this huge agrarian crisis, as to at least give them some level of comfort, economic comfort. So NREGS, if at all anything, what we need to do is we need to further enhance NREGS to a degree where not just 100 days are guaranteed, but probably 150, 200 days of work are guaranteed. And the wages in NREGS also are increased significantly to cover the needs and requirements, the basic needs and requirements of rural families in India. So this is one of the biggest challenges that I think the country as a whole faces, and because working class is integral to everything, every problem. The working class has the biggest problem that we have for the working class in terms of an economic challenge is employment in manufacturing sector not being able to keep up with the migration emanating from the agrarian crisis of our villages. So this is a proposition which is very important, which we have to understand when we try to understand the challenges for the working class. So here again, if you look at things from a very practical aspect also, so we see migration not only from villages to cities. We are now seeing migration, for example, if I take the case of Karnataka itself. So we see large scale migration to the city of Bangalore. So Bangalore is a very interesting case to understand also. The population of Bangalore in 1991 census was around 34 lakhs. So today it is estimated 2023, it is estimated that the population of Bangalore is more than 1.4 crores. So essentially we have seen a fourfold jump in the last 30 years, a fourfold increase. The population of Bangalore has increased by 4 times over the last 30 years. No city in India has had to bear such a burden across, no other city has ever had to face such a burden in India till date. And today it is expected that Bangalore will become the fourth largest city even in terms of population. So what has happened in the case of Bangalore and Karnataka is also a very interesting case study for us to understand the problem. So we have Bangalore, which is internationally known as the IT capital of the country. So we have large scale migration of highly skilled workers from across the country. So engineers from across the country have migrated to Bangalore. Bangalore has, it is estimated that Bangalore generated 15 to 20 lakh direct jobs in the IT industry. So this is a huge number of jobs. Nowhere IT has or any sector has generated these many jobs in one city, and it is welcome. It is welcome. So we are happy that jobs have been created, but it has created jobs in the services sector. But we wanted jobs in the manufacturing sector so that our workers who come from rural areas, agricultural workers who do not have the skills to work in, say, a software industry or a banking industry, they need to be provided jobs. So this is the essential contradiction. So therefore, we see that there's a lot of migration into Bangalore into two major areas. One, the IT sector, the second being the construction sector. And construction sector, again, the demand for the construction sector is essentially because there is a lot of real estate activity that has happened. There is a large scale influx of people from other parts of the country, and therefore the real estate boom also has happened. And as a result of that, you have migration happening into Bangalore, into these two sectors majorly, construction and IT. And if you look at the origin of these migrant workers also, it's very interesting. So we have cases where within the state of Karnataka, parts of Hyderabad, Karnataka are actually quite underdeveloped in terms of human development index. So you have a lot of migration happening into Bangalore from places like Raichur, Koppal, Yadgir, Bidar, etc. So people migrate into lower end jobs like security guards and construction workers. And at the higher end, you have people from northern states, people from other southern states who come to Bangalore and work as IT engineers. And today in construction sector, because of this wage differential, the minimum wage and the market wages in Karnataka or in Bangalore being slightly higher than the rest of the country, then you have workers, even construction workers coming from as far as Jharkhand and West Bengal to work as construction workers in Bangalore. So it's a very interesting problem that we are grappling with even in our city. And for instance, if you look at any South Indian state, there is one more disparity that has emerged, especially over the last 15, 20 years, is the north and south divide in the country. So the southern states have exceedingly done better than their northern counterparts. And the wages in South India are far, far higher than the wages in North India today at almost every level. So if you go to any plantation today in, say, Kerala, Karnataka, or even Tamil Nadu, it's very difficult to find workers from Kerala, Karnataka, or Tamil Nadu working in plantations. Even plantation workers are migrating from far off places like North Bengal and Assam. That is the situation that we are faced. Even the hospitality industry, even a small roadside eatery in Kerala today, the workers are usually people who are migrants from other states. So the wage differential and the lack of social security, social benefits that the northern states have not been able to perform well has also fed into this whole migration aspect. So migration is very multifaceted and a complex phenomena that we are grappling with. And essentially, what is driving migration always is two things. So the push from the villages, the push from the agrarian crisis, the crisis in agriculture, which governments have unable to deal with. So that is the push, and the pull is of higher wages in southern states and southern cities. That is the pull. So this is the push
So,
and the pull of yeah.
we are already dealing with the pressure that is being generated because of rural workers migrating to cities or urban areas. Uh,
Yeah.
Upon that, there is also competition with workers who are coming from other states. So, how is that affecting the local workforce? Like whether they are having to compete or whether they are losing their jobs, how is it affecting them?
Until now, I don't. There has not been too many studies being done on this aspect, but practical experience, what I can tell is at the ground, I don't think there is any conflict between workers from one state and another state, because what has happened is, for instance, in Bangalore, the metro project, if you look at the metro project, so none of the local workers have probably even spent more than a day or two in the metro project, because the wages that the metro project pays is roughly 300 to 400 rupees per day. The market wages in Bangalore are 600. So therefore, we workforce from other states. So the conflict has not been there, but I'm sure there are political undercurrents. And if you look at certain states who have the politics also gets influenced by these changes that we see. So the demand for say localization of labor has always been there, even in Karnataka and in other states also. I think over a period of time, we will see more and more prominence being given to that. So, for instance, there is a very prominent demand among the working class of different states that uh, jobs which are basically factory jobs, around 80 to 75%, 75 to 80% of all factory jobs should be reserved for local workers is a long standing demand across different states in the working class also. So there are issues, but I don't see any large scale conflict between workers as such immediately. But if you look at it, there is a lot of politics around migration also. Very recently, what happened in Tamil Nadu when there was fear mongering spread among Bihari workmen that they were being targeted by Tamilians, and then the state governments of Bihar and Tamil Nadu had to step in, make public statements assuring workers that nothing will happen. Is also very significant in two aspects. One, because I don't think there is resentment against workers from other states. Today, the fact of the matter is, southern states are very much dependent on migrant workforce, be it from Bihar, be it from Jharkhand or West Bengal. The plantations, for instance, in the southern states will not be able to survive without the labor from Bengal and Assam. So that is a hard reality. So capitalism also is that way. Uh, it helps in this aspect that parochial values, feudal values are at least overcome by the lure of commerce. So, so this is one aspect of migration that is very important. That is happening very much within our country. So, and when I talk about manufacturing industry and the crisis in the manufacturing industry not being able to generate jobs, today the situation is such that the government, successive state governments and central governments, the whole idea is that it is not the business of the government to run businesses. So this is a very neoliberal thought process. So where there is no government intervention in market and etc. etc. So therefore, what we have seen is, for example, large-scale disinvestment in public sector companies. So public sector companies would generate a lot of employment earlier. So today that is not the case, because the the intent and the stated policy of successive governments has been to go in for disinvestment and shut down the public sector, or sell it at throwaway prices to large corporate houses. So what we have seen is, for the very first time in 2001, when Vajpayee government came into power, there was a separate ministry called Disinvestment Ministry. So the job of the minister was to just look at industries which can be disinvested, sold off to large corporate houses. So that is the approach of successive central governments and even most state governments. So this is one aspect which has been very critical to our understanding into the failures of manufacturing to generate employment. Because at the end of the day, even the private industry, which is dominant in the private manufacturing sector today, is not interested in generating employment. They are, at the end of the day, they want to make a quick buck. They want to make a good profit, and that's the end of their responsibility. So today, what we are seeing in manufacturing sector is, the number of permanent jobs have gone down very significantly. Today, permanent workers may number only around 25 to 30% in any factory. The rest of the jobs are all contract in nature. And why contract in nature? Because there is uh, the minimum wage is far lower, and contract work is highly insecure. It is precarious employment, and contract workers are, because of the very nature of their employment, are uh, are discouraged to form unions and ask for their rights and fight for their rights. So this makes them a part of a very large flexible workforce at probably subsistence levels. So minimum wage, if you look at minimum wages in a state like Karnataka, which is probably one of the higher minimum wage paying states. So Karnataka minimum wages are around 14,500 rupees. So in 14,500 rupees, a worker is expected to take care of a family of three people for a month. So this is an impossibility. 14,500 will not cover the costs of even one person properly in our own estimates. So we have done various studies where we think that the minimum wage, scientific studies we've carried out, and where we think that the minimum wage should be roughly around 31,500 rupees in a city like Bangalore for a family of three people. So state governments have notified minimum wages of 14,500. Permanent workers are a very small category. Permanent workers enjoy the full benefits of all labor law legislations, and therefore they are able to unionize. And permanent workers are able to command wages of up to 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 for exactly the same work that two sets of workers are doing. In factories, practically we see that the contract worker is working for 8 years, 10 years continuously on the same job that a permanent worker is doing, just that the wages of a permanent worker are probably three times, four times that of a contract worker. So this is the injustice being meted out to contract workers. And as a trade unionist, the problem that we face when we organize contract workers, immediately the contract is terminated, and then there is a new set of workers that are brought in, and these workers lose their jobs. And in India, the problem is that litigation and this process of legal struggles will take anywhere between 6 to 20 years. So the workers do not have the wherewithal and the necessary endurance to survive such a long, lengthy legal battle, whereas the capitalists are happy to litigate, happy to drag it on, and they have the necessary resources for such a long drawn battle. So this is the challenge that we are facing. And when we ask for some sort of regulation of contract labor, so the state is basically uh, fully aware of the situation of contract workers. So I have a question. So let me just finish this bit about contract workers, and I'll get to the question. So uh, so the state, what has happened essentially is that the state today is just a mute spectator to this whole injustice. And in fact, the reality of the matter is that state governments and central governments are the largest employer of contract workers as well. So therefore, there is absolutely no incentive for anybody to act on a blatantly and patently unjust system right in front of our eyes. Everybody allows it to continue unfettered. So yeah, the question is, how does this migration affect the migrant working women and their children? So, so
This
essen-
question is by
when we
Ms. Shikila Nandgavi.
yeah, yeah. So, ma'am, the, the the question of migration is that when we talk about migration from rural areas, when we talk about this migration from people working in agriculture, the only options available for them when they move into a city. So even in migration, again, there are cases where workers migrate for a day and get back to their houses. So they go back to the nearest taluka center, nearest district center, pick up a day's work as a construction worker, and come back late back into their villages. So that is still an acceptable form. It is probably a more smarter way of earning extra wages. But a lot of workers end up coming to bigger cities for a longer term. So what we have seen is for them when they are faced with the situation in a city where you have jobs available for the skills that you carry as an agricultural worker are essentially that of a helper. You can't even get a skilled job in construction. You do the job of a helper in construction, or you end up becoming a security guard or something that requires very little skill, and you end up doing jobs of those nature. So in construction, the problem, of course, is that of accommodation. So large project sites, we have seen women and children, and in a lot of cases, what we have seen is women do actually, women and the men and adult men and women both work as construction workers together side by side, and the education of children does suffer tremendously. So this is something that we've seen practically. So especially when they migrate for longer term, so it does take at least 3 to 5 years for a family like that to get into some sort of economic comfort. I'm not saying you, sorry, not even comfort, to meet the economic necessities, bare economic necessities of life. They will take at least 3 to 5 years in a city like Bangalore, where at the end of those 3 years or 5 years, they will be able to move into some rented accommodation within a shanty town or a slum. So it will take them that kind of time. And during this period, the education of children really gets affected. So education and health impacts on children are tremendous of this sort of distress migration. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So moving on, uh, if there are any other questions, I'll take them now.
No, sir, not yet.
Okay, so I know I'm running short of time. I'll quickly wind up in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
No
See,
problem. You can take a little bit extra time. There's no problem.
okay, okay. In that case, see, one more challenge that the manufacturing sector is already facing, and it will face more and more in the future, is that of what is also called as the fourth industrial revolution. So today, manufacturing activities will be are being transformed rapidly under the influence of robotics and artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, etc., etc. So before going on to the details of that, quick explanation as to what the fourth industrial revolution is. The first industrial revolution is the invention of the steam engine and replacement of muscle power with some sort of rudimentary machines. The second industrial revolution was when mass production started in America, where huge assembly lines were built for the mass production of automobiles through the usage of electricity for the first time in production. That is the second industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution was 1950s, when greater use of computing and computing and electronics was used in manufacturing to take care of menial jobs, mental jobs. So that was the third industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is where even decision making is also now being done by machines, artificial intelligence, big data, etc. So even decision-making powers are being vested with machines, and lot of other allied changes are happening alongside, which will affect manufacturing in a big way. For instance, three-dimensional printing will probably see a lot of customized manufacturing of commodities at a very small scale level, which can seriously impact large factories. So we have not yet come to that situation right now. But one thing that we are already seeing in front of our eyes is things like electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, and tomorrow what we call as unmanned vehicles, artificial intelligence being able to do the driving all by itself, electric vehicles and such technologies coming into the picture will displace a lot of jobs. So traditional understanding was, for example, why we say electric vehicles will displace jobs in India and every other market is because simply because the internal combustion engine, the IC engine, which is the bedrock of automobile industry, which is a huge provider of jobs. An internal combustion engine consists of roughly around 6 to 8,000 moving parts. So these 6 to 8,000 moving parts are being produced by various processes. You can roughly say that each moving part will have at least 10 processes. So 60,000 processes to produce one single internal combustion engine now is being replaced very simply by a battery. So a battery has hardly three, four moving parts and nothing else. So the idea is that simplification of the machine has happened, of the automobile has happened, but at the cost of direct employment. So this is a huge challenge that we will see more and more in the future, and this is something that will impact negatively our employment situation in the country and in the manufacturing sector. So now, quickly moving on to the political challenges. I've been talking mainly about economic challenges and the various trends within the industry and the problems that the working class will face as a result of that. See, one problem is that today neoliberal economic policy is also a form of political thought. So today the dominant thinking within political circles in the West is basically that there is no other alternative to this neoliberal economic model. That is the political thinking. There is no alternative. And fact of the matter remains that it is largely true to a degree because even social democracy is being attacked ruthlessly by neoliberal models. So what we saw in Paris, where the working class had a workers were out on the streets fighting the state, is also an example of how neoliberalism has now gobbled up everything and then created monopoly capitalism, huge corporations which are monopoly and crony capitalism. So we have large monopolies which have now gobbled up public sector industries, gobbled up a lot of resources of the state, and now there is no other alternative for this style of capitalism to grow except to attack social democracy. Social democracy in the forms that are visible to people. So it may be a health system, a public healthcare system like in the UK, NHS. NHS is a very lucrative area for private corporations to now move in on. Insurance companies, private healthcare companies, all are eyeing a piece of that pie. Because neoliberalism and finance capital and monopoly capitalism has reached certain limits with respect to traditional industry. Now they are attacking the very roots of social democracy itself, and this is a phenomena that we see globally. In India, we don't see it as much, or it is not as stark because we never had such a great social democratic system to start with. So our healthcare system was always in shambles. Our education system was not that great to begin with. So what generally happened was privatization happened very quickly in our country without too much challenge, and the political class quickly gobbled up all that space along with the capitalist class. But in the social democratic framework, especially in the Nordic, Scandinavian, and Western European context, I think there are these are the battles that neoliberalism is fighting today. So globally, even social democracy cannot serve as a alternative to neoliberalism. The only alternative to neoliberalism is probably what we have witnessed very recently in places, in countries in Latin America, where neoliberalism has been successfully fought, and then money and resources have been allocated to the poorest of the poor in healthcare, in education. So there, some transformation is transformative process is happening. So those are the alternatives. Only true socialism can work as a alternative to a neoliberal economic and political thought. But globally, since the fall of the USSR, there is definitely a lack of what we call USSR, which also acted as a center of world revolution at one point in time, also provided a viable alternate way of economic organization of society. So all of that we have lost with the collapse of the USSR. There is absolutely no doubt. But today, the alternative has to be found to the injustices of neoliberalism. Politically, alternatives have to be found. So centrist political parties like the Congress I, for example, in India, what they're trying to do is they are trying to come up with uh, schemes to put money into the pockets of the poorest of the poor. Schemes such as what they've announced very recently in the political situation in Karnataka in the upcoming elections. Some of the guarantees that the Congress has made is to basically give money to the woman head of the household, money to unemployed youth. So this will serve as a band-aid, but a band-aid will not stop the hemorrhage. So we may postpone the inevitable, but it is not going to help too much. So we have to attack the root cause of the problem, and the root cause of the problem is that even in India today, very interestingly, even in India today, we are struggling with monopoly capitalism. In fact, one of the deputy governors, ex-former deputy governors of RBI, and he is a deputy governor very much under the Modi regime. So, Mr. Viral Acharya, he has written a paper. He went away from Reserve Bank of India, and I think he is now employed with New York University. He wrote a very interesting paper just a month ago, where he says that the power of five large corporations in India is such that the core inflation level, come what may, will not reduce beyond 4%. So the inflation rate is essentially being of the core inflation rate of the country is essentially being managed by a cartel of five corporations. So that is the situation that we find ourselves today. So when we talk about core inflation rates, I'm talking about industries like cement, coal, steel, etc. So this is exactly what Nehru and even the founding fathers of our nation had envisaged during our independence. The commanding heights of the economy were to be monopolized by the state and through public sector. So the commanding heights of the economy were power, oil, gas, then your heavy industries like steel, mining, etc., were to be monopolized by large public sector companies by the state so that these sort of injustices do not happen. So what the founding fathers of our nation had envisaged is was right to the point, and what they had done has completely been undone over the last 25, 30 years. And these are the problems that we are facing with a group of five corporations now trying to control the economy of the country, and they are ensuring that the inflation does not fall below 4%. That is the stat state of affairs that we have. And these are all political challenges. They may be economic questions, but the challenge is political essentially in nature. So this is the problem that we face. So alongside all this, even in India, coming back to India, if we look at the political response to these challenges, we are we have the we are we are faced with a right-wing government at the center, right-wing government even at the state in Karnataka. So the political responses to these real material problems of the working classes from these governments has been one of complete ignorance of these problems. And the second thing that they've been trying to do is divert these problems by dividing the working class in the name of caste, religion, etc. So in Karnataka itself, for instance, if you look at the issues, that have been raked up by the government. So we've had communal issues on the issue of whether school-going children should be allowed to wear hijab, whether the azan should be allowed in our state or not, and whether halal meat is better or jatka meat is better. So these are the kind of political debates that are happening as a response to the problems. Problems. There was a question which just disappeared. So these are the political responses. I got the question. So these are the kind of political responses that we are seeing to real problems of the workers. So even during the COVID-19, when we saw a huge humanitarian crisis unfolding before our eyes, so even during that time, the the aim of the central government was to communalize the whole issue. So first we heard of Tablighi Jamaat uh, holding their congress of around 2,000 people in Delhi. All of them were rounded up like criminals and then sent to jails. And just 15 days ago, we had an event called Namaste Trump, where more than a lakh people were herded into a stadium called the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad. Nobody questioned that. So the political response of any fascist government is to always divert issues into communal and divide the working class. So these are the challenges. This is the biggest political challenge in front of the working class today, to stick to our core issues, think of issues as a class and behave as a class. We have to look at issues for our class specifically, and then we have to devise our strategies, implement our program for the advancement of the working class alone, and not get diverted by these fascist ideas that are floating all around us. So this is the biggest challenge for us. And the question that came was about unemployment toll. So unemployment toll, will they become lazy? Uh, so my personal opinion is that people honestly don't need dole even in our country. We need good quality employment and good quality education. So even employment, for example, it's not like jobs are not available. Today, jobs are available. The quality of jobs are very poor. So highly unregulated jobs. For example, in Bangalore, you see, Bangalore or any city in the country, you see, there are lakhs of gig workers today who are working. They are around 25,000. They spend 15,000, 10,000, 15,000 rupees on their vehicle maintenance and their fuel costs. So these gig workers also deserve to be treated as workers. There is definitely, when a Swiggy fellow comes and delivers some food packet to the house, he is obviously working for an employer called Swiggy. But this is something that the government refuses to accept. They are called delivery partners. They are not delivery workers. They are delivery executives, a driver partner. So these workers need to be given that status. If there is a political will, we don't need these sort of band-aid solutions to a hemorrhage. So, like I said, this unemployment dole is essentially, it will only postpone the problem, but will not attack the root of the problem, which is we have to generate jobs, and we have to generate jobs in the manufacturing sector. There is no other. So there is another question. So, what are the problems of the working class of the marginalized communities in India? So, marginalized communities in India. Sorry, can we just see the question again? Uh, in rural India, yeah. So, the problems of the marginalized communities in rural India, obviously, caste is a defining factor. Caste continues to define many occupations. Caste continues to define social relations, economic relations in cities today are probably better. Today in factories, the situation is slightly better because economic necessity will triumph over social relations. But in rural India, if we look at the situation, various studies have actually shown that the Dalits, the Adivasis, and the Muslims are the most discriminated when it comes to the employment market within India. in fact, there is a very interesting study taken up by professors in Delhi. I think Sukhdev Thorat and other professors in Delhi. I think the study is around 10, 15 years old. But what they did was very interestingly, they applied to jobs in the private sector. So they applied to jobs, sent out resumes by ensuring that each of these resumes were fake. Each of the resumes had names which would act as markers of caste. So the surnames would be very, very clear, and they would act as markers of caste. And what they noticed was similarly experienced, similarly qualified resumes of an upper caste and a Dalit upper caste and a Muslim upper caste and an Adivasi. The upper caste candidate, the resume, the fake resume, had a far, far better chance of getting one step ahead in that whole process. So caste does continue to caste continues to play a very significant role, and marginalized communities are do struggle much greater in comparison to other communities. There is no doubt about that. So finally, let me just complete. So the biggest political challenge, according to me, in my personal opinion, is fascism, and how we are able to operate within this fascist framework to ensure that our real issues are not diverted by this fascist state is the biggest political challenge for the working class. The economic challenge for the working class is to ensure that we build a very strong alliance between rural and urban India. That is an economic and a political task for trade unions and working class parties to ensure that there is a strong alliance between the farmer and the worker, the farm laborer and the industrial worker in cities. So these sort of alliances have to not only be built but also yeah, joint strategies have to be planned in accordance with these realities, and there have been significant steps in that line which have been taken up by trade unions and working class movements together in the recent past. So with this, I think I end my presentation. I can take questions if there are.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. I do have a question. I have two questions actually. The first one I have posted on the screen. Can true socialism be implemented in the context of India, where we have, apart from class differences, differences of caste, religion, languages, regionalism, and whatnot?
Okay. So, very broad and very difficult question, but I'll have a go at it. So, see, socialism is not a theoretical construct. So, socialism has to happen on the ground, and when the system of capitalist to happen. So, for instance, what Marx says in the first line of Communist Manifesto is essentially this: the history of mankind is nothing but the history of class struggle. So, class struggle is continuous, and it continues to happen. But essentially, the break from one mode of economic organization to another happens only when the current mode of economic organization is unable to sustain itself. So, the contradiction of the capitalist system, when the contradictions are unable to resolve themselves within the framework of the capitalist system, is when we move to another order. So that order may be socialist, it may be half capitalist, half socialist. We don't know that order. So that is a question that has to be tackled practically by people in large numbers wanting change. So even, for example, the Russian Revolution didn't happen for the cause of the socialist revolution. The unifying call of the Russian Revolution was bread and peace, because they were faced with Russian soldiers dying in the front in the First World War, and there were massive food shortages within the country. So there was this problem where your young boys were being killed on the Western Front, and then you have huge food shortages. The system that the Tsar and the feudal system in Russia was no longer able to sustain a costly war abroad, and also the domestic issues within their own country. So there was a break in the feudal order, and that break in the feudal order, in that break emerged a system, and that system emerged based on whoever was able to understand the objective conditions very clearly and place subjectively something that appealed to the masses and take the movement forward. So theoretically, it is very difficult to define whether socialism is possible or not, because one thing is for sure: if we are students of history, we have to understand one thing, that change is permanent. So change is permanent in the sense that evolution has happened with different economic forms of organization. We moved from barbarism to slavery to feudalism to capitalism. So capitalism cannot be the end of history. As long as there is scope for improvement, there is injustice that is happening, things will change, and these contradictions within the economic system will bring to fore these possibilities.
Thank you, sir. I have another question actually. We do not talk about the manual scavengers or those who are rack pickers, etc. They do not
Mm.
form, they are not counted as workers at all. But that is what they do for a living. And we are sending satellites to the outer space. We are sending missions to the Mars. But can we not come up with something that can stop manual scavenging? And what are the problems that those people face?
So, for example, it's a valid point, and this is also our major demand, that we have to end manual scavenging, and it doesn't take a lot of resources, honestly, to end manual scavenging in our country. So, we can talk about Swachh Bharat for ages and eons together, but unless and until we put an end to manual scavenging, nothing really matters. And that again is a question of political will. For example, Paura Karmikas in Karnataka, they were regularized in Bangalore at least. They were regularized around 15,000 Paura Karmikas were regularized, given permanency in their employment and all of that. And very interestingly, these are the uh, feudal remnants that continue to influence our capitalist mode of production. So, for example, reservation is a hot topic now. Every community wants reservation, but nobody demands reservation in manual scavenging. Nobody wants reservation in Paura Karmikas, even though the Paura Karmika may be a permanent employee of the municipal corporation. But nobody demands reservation because it is anyway 100% reserved for those Dalit castes who are forced to do it as a hereditary occupation. But these are things that the trade unions have taken up very seriously, especially in terms of organizing Paura Karmikas. And I would not say manual scavengers have been organized to a large degree by trade unions, because trade unions, at the end of the day, whatever we call, we have serious limitations of resources also. We are essentially an urban based movement of the workers. So sanitary workers across cities have been organized very strongly by trade unions, and changes have been at least demanded of the government, if not anything else.
Absolutely, sir. On the whole, it shows that not talking about the trade unions per se, but society in general is okay if the low caste workers are facing problems of sanitation, or they have to go into those gutters to clean them. If it was somebody from the upper caste, or say the privileged community, there would be a huge cry for that. So we
Correct.
are negligent towards the marginalized community. That is the truth of our situation.
That is 100% true. And this is
Yes,
not
sir.
a problem for which we don't have resources, technology, etc. Technology is easily there and easily available, so it's not a difficult thing to tackle.
Yes, we are just not ready to allocate that technology
Yeah,
to those people, and we are
correct,
not even ready to involve people from other communities in that work.
correct, correct.
Yes,
No, that way, if you look at it, the working class composition also, everywhere there is broad congruence of class and caste. So housekeeping jobs, even in factories, are more or less, I think, done by Dalit communities only, housekeeping jobs. So that sort of congruence between within the class also, caste continues to operate quite strongly. So there is no question.
Yes, sir. If any of the other members of the audience have any additions, comments, or questions, please post them in the chat box now. So, if with your permission, I would like to ask one last question from my side.
Sure, ma'am. Sure.
What are some unique problems that are faced only by women or the female workforce? Because we see that they form 50% of the workforce, and there is some amount of wage disparity, and they do not get the benefits that they need, because in the organized sector they have maternity leave and all that, but the unorganized sector, we see women, they do not have all those facilities.
Yeah.
So what are some unique problems?
So this one thing is, for women workers, the single largest generation of employment for women happens as in urban India is in domestic work. So that is the single biggest provider of employment for women in urban India, domestic work. So most women are engaged as domestic workers across the country. So that is a big injustice. That is gender division of labor that happens in our country. So that is one problem. The second problem is, for example, if you take a state like Karnataka itself, industrial workers. So 90% of all women working in industries are confined to garment industry. Garment industry wages are far lesser than automobile industry. So, for example, minimum wages for a woman worker is 10,400 rupees in Karnataka. The minimum wages for the same woman, if she goes and works in a automobile factory, is 14,500 rupees. So, 4,000 rupees gap is not a small gap; it is a big gap. So nobody bothers. And when we talk about all these issues with the government employers and the government, they openly state that this is second employment for the family. The woman of the household is also working, no, in garment. So why do you want wages equivalent to that to the male worker? So uh, these are the notions that educate and inform our public policy decisions. So this is the kind of attitude and approach that we as trade unions we constantly have to fight with. So, for instance, in this garment thing also, now we have approached the High Court. So, we have from our organization AITUC, we have approached the High Court saying that this is clear case of discrimination and this cannot be allowed to happen, because if it is a case of an unskilled worker is as unskilled to work in the garment industry and as unskilled to work in the automobile industry. There cannot be a difference in wages. So today I work in the garment industry, tomorrow I can go and work in the automobile industry because I don't have any skill, according to the government itself. So you cannot have a difference of 4,000 rupees per month for different industries. So this sort of discrimination is very prevalent. And you raise the question of maternity leave. Interestingly, I tell you, see, it is very we can fight for these rights for women workers, for maternity rights and all that. So it is a big advancement of women's rights. But private sector capitalism, you know how it operates. They take that up as a deterrent to hire women workers in industry, because 6 months paid maternity leave they have to pay, whereas a male worker they don't have to pay that. So therefore they prefer not to hire a woman worker. These are the sort of challenges within the organized sector. So gender discrimination is very prevalent, organized, unorganized. It's very clear and apparent for everybody to see. So garment, why they want
I do.
only women workers is because they think that women workers are easily controlled and they will be able to keep unions away if women are hired in greater numbers. So that is the only reason the garment industry is hiring women. And once they hire women, they lobby with the government, the employers lobby with the government to keep the minimum wages low, depress their wages. So this is the hard reality.
I do want to add something here. Uh, not only maternity leave. Now we have to also talk about paternity leave, because if that is made the norm, uh, easily it will become like there will be equality when we are talking about uh, paid leave. I think men also should get that leave to
The
get to
paternity
spend
leave
time.
has been some industries they give paternity leave of 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. But that will the thing is you should penalize these industries who discriminate on the basis of gender. So that provision is already there under the law. Equal Remuneration Act clearly says that discrimination on the basis of gender is not allowed. But the thing is that is a provision of the law that is very difficult to prove. Even
They
at the
find
stage of
loopholes.
recruitment itself, at the stage of recruitment itself, you don't call for women applicants. How can you prove that there has been discrimination? That is the problem. There is discrimination, but to prove that is the problem.
Yes, sir. They find loopholes to
Mm,
avoid those things. And
mm,
also, when we look at organized sector, there are obviously women in the working force, and they are getting equal wages, etc. But they are kept at the lower positions, um, at the most managerial or supervising positions, and we don't see many women CEOs or women at the top posts. Nowadays it is improving. Of course, there is positive change, but it's still very slow. The pace is very, very slow.
agreed. There is a study on boardrooms in India, corporate boardrooms, board of directors. They did an analysis. So women are discriminated. 90% of board of directors across, I think, hundreds of corporate companies essentially are all men, upper caste from either mostly Brahmin, Kshatriya or Banya caste. So 90% is dominated by three castes and male dominated. So that is true.
Yes, sir. Uh, Definitely, we have to keep discussing, and there is a lot more that will always be left for discussion. But within one lecture or one session, this is how much we can throw light on, or we can deliberate on. I think we have come towards the end of this session. It was absolutely enlightening for us. There are a lot of things that we have learned new today, and obviously there are many questions that are being raised in our minds. We will try to find answers to those, and do our little bit towards bringing equality in the workforces as future employees um, of the government or private sectors. We do not know that, but definitely we will have to fight for our rights when we become workers, and even today when we are not, as students, because education is also one of the most important criteria in skill development when we talk about workers. So as students, it is also our right and our duty to create awareness about uh, working classes and the problems that they are facing. So it was really, really very wonderful, sir, to interact with you today here.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you very much.
do you have
And
any any message for us, sir, for the those who are going to be workers and those who are students today?
so one message is that the students of today are the workers of tomorrow. The problems that we just discussed are the problems that all the students will eventually face very soon in their employment, be it white collar jobs or blue collar jobs. So essentially, in any situation, it is wise and best to understand the limitations of the economic system and also to try and build alliances between workers between these divisions are all artificial, right? So teacher is also a worker, an academic is also a worker. So the fact remains that it is important for a broad-based unity to be achieved among the working class. So I think if students of today are sensitized towards the problems of the working class, tomorrow they should start looking at themselves as being constituents of the working class and try to advance the cause of the working class. Yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Absolutely, sir. We'll definitely um, as I and Nidhi, as students and as the office bearers of the history enthusiasts, we promise from our side that we will do our little bit towards this, and more in future when we have more power. Coming to the end of this session, I request Ms. Nidhi Katti, Vice President of the History Enthusiast, to kindly propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Manali. Thank you so much. Uh, Today's lecture was really very wonderful, sir. It enlightened us a lot. So I thank Mr. Satyanand Yam, sir, for giving this wonderful lecture on Laborers' Day. Surely we will try our best uh, to make our workforce more gendered, uh, genderly equal, and filled with equity. So whatever is possible from our side, we will surely do that, sir. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being part of the history enthusiast. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I also thank President of the History Enthusiast, Ms. Manali Momaya. Thank you so much for making us listen such a wonderful lecture and finding the very perfect resource person for Laborers' Day. Thank you so much. And also I thank all the audience who were active throughout the session, and particularly I thank Chaya Momaya, treasurer of the History Enthusiast, and Shivalila Nandagavi, Aruni sir, who was live with us. Thank you so much, sir. So I request all the audience to be tuned for our next lecture. We are planning something on Buddha Purnima too. So stay tuned, stay happy. Thank you so much.
I also want to thank, particularly here, we cannot forget the name of Dr. Siddhan Gowda Patil sir. It is because of him that this lecture was possible today. Sir asked me to contact Satyanand sir. He gave me the number, and he also spoke with sir personally. So we should not forget him here. He has also joined after a lot of a struggle with the network. Sir was able to join the lecture. So, sir, if you're watching us, thank you so much from the office bearers of history enthusiasts. And before signing off, I do want to tell all the audience members that we are turning 3 years old. Our association uh, is turning 3 years old on 13th May. So it was a very beautiful journey so far. We have had many wonderful lectures like today. And on 13th, we are planning to start an online international level webinar. We have a set of wonderful speakers. We have interesting topics, and the entire theme of the webinar is rewriting her story. We are focusing on the neglected past of women in India and the Indian subcontinent at large. So please join us. The registration form and the details of the webinar have been posted in our Insta Facebook page, and you can also contact us via our email. You can, or there is also the phone number of myself and Nidhi on the brochure. You can call us at any time if you have any questions. We will assist you. So please join us in the webinar in the celebration of our anniversary. Thank you so much for supporting us. Signing off here. Bye bye. Stay safe. Jai Hind.